The morning I received the award I'd spent years chasing, I kept checking the auditorium entrance, convinced someone from my family would eventually appear. But the doors stayed empty, while hundreds of other families filled the seats with flowers, cameras, and proud smiles. When my name, Mara Bennett, was announced as the winner of the Regional Innovation Fellowship, I walked onto the stage alone, accepted the crystal trophy with both hands, and smiled brightly for the cameras even though a quiet disappointment settled somewhere behind my ribs. After the ceremony, I waited outside beneath strings of golden lights while classmates celebrated around me, and my phone remained stubbornly silent until a message finally arrived from my older brother, Ethan, asking whether I could transfer $1,800 because our mother had apparently promised to pay for his new motorcycle before the weekend. I stared at the screen, then looked down at the trophy in my hands, realizing that my family had managed to ignore the biggest accomplishment of my life while still remembering exactly where to find me whenever they wanted something. I had grown accustomed to being the dependable one, the daughter who answered calls during work meetings, covered unexpected bills, drove across town whenever someone needed help, and somehow became responsible for problems I hadn't created. While my younger sister Sophie received expensive birthday celebrations and spontaneous shopping trips, I learned early that praise in our house usually came with a request attached, so I stopped expecting anyone to notice how hard I worked. Years earlier, my parents had convinced me to postpone my own plans so I could help keep the family restaurant afloat after a difficult season, promising that once things improved, they would help me pursue my goals. Instead, I worked evenings, studied before sunrise, and quietly watched my savings disappear into expenses that somehow always became my responsibility. I never complained because I believed sacrifice was what loving your family meant, but eventually I understood that sacrifice only has meaning when it is freely chosen rather than endlessly demanded. The award changed something inside me, not because the trophy made me successful overnight, but because it proved that I could build a future without waiting for my family to validate it. The following Monday, I moved my important documents into a private storage box, redirected my mail, changed the passwords on my financial accounts, and told myself that these weren't acts of betrayal. They were simply the first practical steps toward becoming responsible for my own life. 3 days later, my mother called instead of texting, and her voice was unusually sweet as she explained that the family restaurant had fallen behind on several payments and that she needed me to sign some paperwork, just temporarily, so they could refinance a business loan. When I asked what exactly I would be signing, she hesitated for so long that I heard the refrigerator humming in the background before she finally admitted that the documents would make me personally responsible if the restaurant couldn't repay the money. I refused, and for the first time in my life I didn't soften the answer with an apology, but my mother immediately accused me of becoming selfish, reminded me of everything the family had supposedly sacrificed for me, and told me that success had made me forget where I came from. I calmly replied, "I haven't forgotten where I came from, Mom. I'm finally remembering where I need to go." And before she could answer, I ended the call with my hands trembling but my decision completely steady. That evening, Ethan appeared outside my apartment carrying a folder and wearing the expression he always used when he wanted me to feel guilty, telling me that I had embarrassed the family and that everyone expected me to do the right thing. Instead of arguing, I opened the folder, photographed every page, and discovered something that made my stomach drop. My name had already been typed onto a preliminary guarantee document, even though I had never agreed to it. The next morning, I contacted the bank listed on the paperwork and explained that I had never authorized the guarantee. And after reviewing their records, a compliance officer told me that someone had submitted copies of my identification and an old signature sample during the application process. I didn't accuse anyone on the phone, but when the officer mentioned that the documents had been delivered from my parents' business address, every unanswered question from the past few weeks suddenly seemed to connect. Instead of confronting my family immediately, I documented everything, requested written confirmation from the bank, secured my credit profile, and spoke with a legal advisor who explained that protecting myself first was far more important than winning an argument with people who had already crossed a serious boundary. 2 days later, my mother called furious and demanded that I withdraw the complaint. But when I told her that the bank was handling the matter and that I would no longer discuss financial issues privately, her anger turned into a silence so cold that I knew the relationship had changed permanently. A week later, the bank confirmed that the guarantee had been stopped before it could become active, and the investigation showed that my documents had been submitted without my authorization, meaning I would not be responsible for the restaurant's debt. My father finally called that night, not to apologize for what happened, but to quietly admit that my mother had believed I would eventually sign anything if she pressured me enough. And hearing him say, it allowed hurt more than any accusation because it confirmed that my kindness had been treated as a weakness. Months passed, and I stopped measuring my life by how often my family contacted me, instead filling my days with work, new friendships, weekend hikes, and small celebrations that didn't require anyone's permission. Then, almost a year after that lonely award ceremony, I received an invitation to speak at a national conference about the project that had earned me the fellowship. And as I stood backstage listening to hundreds of people applauding my introduction, I realized I wasn't scanning the doors anymore. After my speech, I walked outside into the cool evening air and found a group of colleagues waiting with a small cake decorated with the words, "You did it, Mara." And for the first time, the celebration didn't feel like something I had to earn from people who had repeatedly overlooked me. I understood then that family can be something you're born into, but belonging is something built through respect, honesty, encouragement, and the simple willingness to show up when someone you love finally reaches the moment they've worked so hard to achieve. If this story reminded you of someone who had to choose peace over endless guilt, remember that setting a boundary doesn't make you cruel, protecting yourself doesn't make you selfish, and walking away from unhealthy expectations can sometimes be the beginning of your strongest chapter. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.